Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out to hear about our trip to Uganda and Tanzania. We're going to share some photos with you and tell you some background behind those photos. And to start us off, Cherry's going to sing Jesus Loves You in Swahili. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But we're really grateful to be able to share this with you and very thankful that you supported us to go. I was there for 3 weeks. Cherry was there for 1 week, and we'll talk a little bit about how all that played out in just a few moments. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate the support of Grace Bible Church and being able to go and do this. And hopefully as we talk through some of these pictures, you're going to see some of the importance about what is going on and what's happening and why it's worthy of our consideration to continue to work there as long as the Lord leaves a door open for that to happen. So with that being said, I'm just going to open us in prayer and then we'll jump right in. Father, thank you for this opportunity to speak about what you're doing in Uganda and Tanzania, and Lord, the people that we got to meet there and the things that we got to do. Father, we're so grateful that we could play a small part in your work. And as we share these photos and these memories, Lord, I pray that you would speak to our hearts and Lord, just continue to teach us and show us how to best live for you where we are here, Lord, in Ohio. So Father, I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So I work with an organization. It's called Ancient Promise. Ancient Promise is they used to be in California. Now they're based out of Arizona. And what we do is we use an inductive Bible study to teach pastors how to interpret the Bible using this inductive Bible study process. And as they go through and answer the questions that are in this inductive Bible study, we teach them how to take the answers to a passage and turn it into a sermon outline. And we don't do that here in the United States because in the United States we have resources and commentaries, and we have seminaries, and we have all kinds of things that are available for pastors to use here that just aren't available there. And so most of the pastors that we work with, the vast majority of them are somewhere around the 8th, 9th grade education. That's as far as they got. They know how to read. They know how to write. They hear things on the internet, okay, because a lot of them have smartphones. So they'll listen to people on the internet, and of course they'll take some of the things that they hear on the internet and they'll just turn around and try to preach that. And sometimes that can be okay, because as long as they're listening to the right person, someone who's teaching truth, then they can turn around and do that. But unfortunately, what happens to a lot of them is that they ultimately end up listening to someone who's not teaching entirely the truth. And so then they begin to propagate that same thing, and they don't know. They don't know that they're not sharing truth. And so that's how Ancient Promise came together, and that's how I got involved with them. And so this was probably my 5th or 6th time to go with Ancient Promise to serve in Africa. Usually I have gone to Kenya. But last year, we went to Tanzania, and this year, actually, I went to Uganda and in Tanzania, and Cherry came and joined me in Tanzania for the 3rd week that I was there. So as we go through these pictures, I'll be talking mostly, because I put them in the order of the trip, so Uganda was first, so I'll be talking a lot about Uganda. And then there's Pajarina. Pajarina was the refugee camp that I went to that's on the border of Uganda and South Sudan, and I'll talk about that. And then after that is Tanzania, and that's where Cherry will jump in and start sharing stuff about Tanzania. So we'll start off in Uganda. If you just want to go to the next slide, see what the first, so this is where it landed. This was right out the airport. I didn't know Uganda was known as the Pearl of Africa, but it is. It's the Pearl of Africa because pretty much you can grow anything there. It's very fertile land. Pretty much if you know what you're doing, you can grow something year-round in Uganda. So you can go to the next one. This is a typical fruit market on the side of the street. These are pretty much everywhere. We stopped, so it was 31 hours for me to fly there, and that's counting layovers. I had 10 hours of layovers and 21 hours of flight, and then when we landed, it was a 9-hour van ride to where we were going, and so that wasn't fun, really, but we stopped, and this is just a little fruit market that we stopped at, and I grabbed this picture. These little guys were outside the place where we stayed. Every morning they were just laying in the sun. And so I snagged a picture of them, the goats that were out there. You can go to the next one. This is, behind me in this picture is the guest house that I stay in. They call them guest houses. It's like a motel / hotel, but it's, there's a one way in and one way out, so it's a bit of like a compound, but it's not as serious as a compound. But it's very safe place. And so outside the guest house, this is a typical where we were in Uganda. This is the typical living quarters of a family in Uganda. This little hut that you see there. That wooden structure is a store. And so there was a guy that would come there every day and set up things and sell things from that store. He was closed when I took the picture. This is Tobias, or Tobias. And Tobias was our connection in Uganda. He is actually from South Sudan. Tobias he was a child soldier in South Sudan, and he met as an adult, still in the Army, he met a Marine chaplain who was over there from the United States, and that chaplain led him to the Lord. And ultimately he became a pastor. And so now Tobias is very involved on the continent of Africa. He speaks out against child soldiering and things of this nature. But I've come to have a lot of respect for him, and I hope I get to work with him again. He speaks really good English. I would love to bring him here to share with us. But I'll tell you more about his story as we go on in just a moment. But he was our connection this time. He was the one that kind of arranged everything for us. This is the structure that we met in to teach the pastors in Uganda. Go to the next slide. Okay, this is them singing. I'll just let you hear this. You will hear the Christians sing. You will hear the Christians sing. So every morning before class started, they would come together and have a praise time, a singing time. The reason I recorded that is because they were singing in a language I had never heard before, and it's Mali. And so they speak English, but this was, I guess, the most common language among all of them there was this language of Mali. And that's how each day started. They would come together, they would sing a couple of very lively songs, and then we would start class. And class would go for about 8 hours. There was another man there named Kurt Pearson. He's a pastor in California. He taught in the morning for about 2.5, 3 hours. We would break. Then I would come back and teach after break until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, teaching my part of the program. So if you go to the next slide. This is a little hut outside where we were holding our classes. And so we would break up into small groups for different activities. And so this is where one of the groups was, and while they were out there meeting one day, I just took their picture while they were meeting. The pastors that were there at this one, there were about 30 of them. All of these pastors were pastors on the refugee camp, real close to where we were. And they all pastored churches on the refugee camp. And so they got permission to come off the refugee camp to come to this class, and which I think is a little bit bigger deal than I thought it was, for them to get permission to come off. We did get to go on the refugee camp one day, but again, we had to go to the UN office. We had to meet with different people to be allowed on. They just don't let anybody into the camps, which I didn't know that's how it worked, but that's how it was. So these pastors that are sitting here, they're typically, most all of them were from South Sudan, and they're refugees in Uganda, and they have churches in the refugee camps. The area where we were, there are 18 different refugee camps. The one camp that I went on had 40,000 people on it. So all 18 together is about 250,000 people that were refugees in that one area. There are actually more than that in Uganda, but in that area, there's about 250,000. This is just another picture of the facility we were using for our training of the pastors. This facility is a Word of Life facility. So you may have heard of Word of Life. It's there's an African branch to the Word of Life that comes out of Egypt, and so they have bought different properties across the continent of Africa, and they use those properties for different events and different things. And so they let us use this property to do this pastor training that we were holding. This is some of the people that were there at the facility that took care of us. We had a break in class, and I was just walking around, and I took a picture. It was interesting because the one laying sound asleep there on the ground, they work really hard. That's the best way I know to say it. They just work hard, and but they're very loving, very kind, very friendly. Definitely wanted to talk to us and get to know us. Very, very sweet people. But these none of these people were the pastors. They're the staff at the facility, and they provided our meals. They cooked our meals, and they kept the place up while we were there. Again, this is just some of the houses, the typical housing of where we were in Uganda. These the huts. These huts are made out of brick. I'm going to show you some in just a minute that are made out of mud. And we were just driving through town, and I took that picture. This is the kids to the family, one of the families that are the workers there at the facility that we were at. They all love their picture to be made. They want to see it after you take their picture. And a lot of them have never seen a white person, and so they're intrigued by that. And so a lot of times what they'll do is come up and rub my hand because they want to know if it'll rub off. And then they'll look at their hand. Did it rub off on them? So that was pretty fun. But they're sweet kids, just kids running around playing in the dirt. That mountain, on the other side of that mountain was South Sudan. So that tells you how close we were to the South Sudanese border. And so this is taken, I climbed to the top of the facility that we were in. They had a ladder that went all the way to the top, so I went all the way to the top. And when I got up there, I took a picture. And you could tell it's very green, very, very green and lush there where we were. But just on the other side of that mountain is sand, a lot of sand. Very dry, very arid. So you can go to the next one. This is lunchtime. And so those people that prepared lunch, they would prepare it for the pastors, and then we would break for lunch, and this is the pastors lining up to eat lunch, getting their food. While they were with us, they ate 3 meals a day, which is normally not the case. Normally they might get 1 or 2 meals a day at home inside the refugee camp. But with us, we were able to give them 3 meals a day. And so we would break and go eat with them also. You can go to the next one. There's a little cross that was coming into the facility. I just took a picture of it while we were there that day. So this is them singing again. That would happen every morning. And then after break, when we would come back from breaks, that's how we would start class. Every time they would start singing. This is a picture of the class. Again, it was about 30 pastors. We used a chalkboard and like a whiteboard. That's how we used. We'd write things. This was during the day, obviously, so we had plenty of sunlight by the time the sun started going down. They had electricity, but they didn't have enough light bulbs to keep the room lit. So we had to get everything done during the day, which was not a problem. Those blue chairs that you see in those pictures, there's got to be 1 billion of those blue chairs in Africa alone. They are everywhere. Everywhere we went, we found those blue chairs. You go to the next one. This lady was, again, she's one of the cooks, one of the people there, and they were out working one day, and I just asked them if I could take pictures of them while they were working, and they were like, yes, and then they all got together and said, take our picture together. So there they are. I don't know any of their names. They were all very sweet. The women do not speak as much English as the men, and so they were much harder to communicate with than the men were. You can go to the next one. This is a little critter, this little lizard/salamander. They were everywhere, completely harmless, but I caught one, took a picture of it quickly. There's a little boy again. He was just sitting on a rock one day and yelled at me and said, take my picture. So I did. Then I went and showed it to him, and he was happy. This is one of the ladies preparing lunch. This is how they did it. They sat on the ground, and they put things together. The food was very good, but we had a lot of the same thing over and over again. Typically, we would have beans and rice, and sometimes a thing that they had what they call chapata, which was like a fried tortilla, but it wasn't corn, it was wheat. And then they all had ungali. Yes, potatoes. We had a lot of potatoes. Yeah, I don't know how I forgot that. You're right. We had a lot of potatoes. And rice. This is her preparing rice. This is her getting the chaff out of the rice. She would hold it up, pour it from one pan to the next, and let the wind blow the chaff out of the rice. This is lunchtime. They had a bigger hut that we could all get under at lunchtime, and so they would put all the food out there just like that, and we would get in a line and get our food and sit in this big hut and all eat together. This is when class was over, somebody trying to make a selfie. Somebody took a picture of us trying to make a selfie, and then they sent it to me. So that's Pastor Kurt there in front of me. He's the pastor from California, and so he and I were the primary teachers there for the 10-day stretch that we took. Okay. One night it rained, so this is what the rain looked like. You'll be able to see here in a second how it's gushing rain. But it was raining really hard. It made me think of the song, The Rain's Down in Africa. That's what was going And so this was in the airport. This is just a funny slide. We were flying out of Uganda, flying to Tanzania. And so I need to what's interesting about this is that most of Africa doesn't have toilets. Okay, they have holes in the floor, and so you stand over the hole and use the restroom. And so apparently there's some confusion about when you're with a toilet how you're to use that toilet. And so I thought this picture was quite funny, and so I thought I'd share it with you. It's a funny picture. This is at the end of class. This is all of us together. They're holding their certificates, saying they completed the course, and so that was fun to be able to celebrate that moment with them. Like I said, the pastors that we worked with, most of them, there were 2 or 3 guys there that had education beyond the 8th or 9th grade, but the vast majority of them were 8th, 9th grade pastors, 8th, 9th grade education, and we're now pastors. So it's kind of hard to explain, but being a pastor on the refugee camp, which is where these guys were coming from, could be one of the more lucrative careers on a refugee camp, because you're not allowed to work at the refugee camp. And so if you're a pastor, people come together, if they take up an offering, those kinds of things, that's a source of income that other people don't have. So sometimes people get into being a pastor for some of the wrong reasons, because if you're living on a refugee camp, there's very few opportunities to make money. And so part of going through this and the times that I've gone and done it, I've seen men who will break down and start crying because they realize they've been doing this for the wrong reason, and now they want to do it for the right reason. I've seen them cry and say over certain truths that they learn, they'll start crying and saying, I didn't know that wasn't the truth. No one's ever told me that. I've seen pastors get saved when they go through the training, and they're like, I'm not even a Christian. So it's very different from our culture. It's very different from the way we do church, and so when we go and work with these pastors, you never know what's going to happen, what's going to unfold. But it's always very, very memorable and very special. So again, what made this group unique is that they were all refugees, and again, most of them from South Sudan, and so they're pastoring in a very poverty-stricken area, is the best way I know to describe it. And the next few slides that we're going to look at together are from Pangeria. If you want to flip, there you go, Pangeria. So this was at the UN office there outside the refugee camp. We pulled up beside this truck that is from the United States. It was donated by the United States to help there at the refugee camp. One of the first things they told us when we got out was don't take any pictures. But I took a picture of this anyway. I did it very incognito. But I wanted people to see. I know we gripe about taxes. I know we got all of our issues. But I want you to know something. The United States does some good things, and this was just one of them. One of the things that are out there that I don't know, I thought you might appreciate. This is where some of your tax dollars go, to do things just like this. You can go to the next slide. This was at a church that I was asked to preach at. It's called Maranatha Church. It's on the refugee camp. This is actually Tobias's little boy, and this was before the church service started, he was just it was raining really hard that morning, and so he is just kind of hanging out, waiting for church to start. That's what their pews look like, if you saw what he was hanging on. This is him and Tobias there. We're sitting there together waiting for church to get started. You could tell in the picture it's just a tin roof building and dirt floor. Again, more blue chairs. The blue chairs are everywhere. And that's the church that we met in. You can go to the next one.
The stars begin to fall. You will hear the Christians sing. You will hear the Christians sing.
That's their praise and worship team. It's probably one of the better ones I've ever heard. But that was them starting off the worship time together that day. You can go to the next slide. This is the church building. Caught a picture of it as when church was over with, and there's those blue chairs. This is the church. Some of them had already left, but some stood around and talked to us, and so this is just a group picture. Some of the church members gathered around us. And in that picture to my right, there's a woman standing there who's got blonde hair. Her name's Robbie. Robbie founded Ancient Promise. And so she's been going to Africa since 2007. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so before she came to meet us here in Uganda, she was actually in South Sudan. Yeah, by herself. Cherry wanted you to know that. She's by.
Me.
Yeah. She went by herself. There were some African people went with her, but she was the only American in the group that went to South Sudan, and so they went to the city of Juba in South Sudan, which is the capital of South Sudan. That's where Tobias is from. Tobias and his family live on this refugee camp. And so he will leave the refugee camp and go up into South Sudan where his church is, and he'll do some ministering up there. But his family, he keeps his family on the refugee camp because it's not safe where they are in South Sudan. So you can go to the next one. This is Tobias and his wife on the right, and then the left is the pastor and his wife of the church that we were at that morning at Maranatha. Now this is driving around on the refugee camp. When we went to the refugee camp, I didn't really know what to expect. I thought it would be very crowded. I thought it would be a lot of people stacked on top of people. It was not like that. It was very spread out like this. And so the way it works is every refugee in Uganda gets a 10 by 10 plot of land in the refugee camp, 10 meters by 10 meters plot of land. And if you have more people in your family, if you have 2 people in your family, then you get 2 10 by 10. If you have 3, you get 3 10 by 10. You follow? And so a family would come together and they would have their plot of land. And you can see here these huts are made out of mud. And so it's just dried mud. I don't know how they do it, how that comes together, but that's what all of the housing on the refugee camp was, just like this. So there were thousands of these everywhere. And so we just drove around the refugee camp, and I snagged some pictures. You can go to the next one. Again, very green, very lush. I think you can see that or not, but we went to the edge of the camp. There's a barbed wire fence there, and so I just grabbed a picture of the edge of it. Don't really know if it's there to keep people out or keep people in. It's just there. This is a picture of a boy that was just hanging out on a tree after we came out after church that day, and so I just snagged this picture. I didn't ask permission. I just took it. These are 2 boys that again, we're watching. I just thought it was a nice picture. And so I took it. Again, not many of them have seen a lot of white people. So when they saw a white person, they just stopped and looked, wondering what was going on. This is, again, driving around the refugee camp. I think, this is someone's outdoor kitchen where they prepared food. So a larger family would, again, these refugees, they leave South Sudan, they flee South Sudan, they come together. If there's a large family, they can get kind of a large plot of land together. And so those huts, they'll build several of the huts, all on this land together. And some of them will have in the center of all of their huts something like this. This is where they fix their meals, serve their meals, and do different things. That's what that is. This is the watering hole. Those cans are called jerry cans, and so there's no running water, nor is there electricity in the refugee camp. So part of what the refugees have to do every day is they have to go to the well and get water, and so they pump it out and they pump it into these jerry cans, and then they take it back to their hut. There's more than one well at the refugee camp. This is just the one that we drove past. I took a picture of it real quickly when we were doing it. You can see a lot of people grow their food. So once a quarter, the people living on a refugee camp, once a quarter, they get a food supplement from the United Nations. And so they grow the rest of their food. A lot of corn. But you can really grow almost any vegetable that you would want. You could grow it there as long as there's enough water, rain, for things to grow. So as you drove around the refugee camp, you would see all these huts, but around the huts would be some type of garden where the family's growing their food. And that's just, again, more of that. The same here. I think that's probably an outhouse, a bathroom. This is all on the refugee camp. Yeah, you can keep going. It's pretty much the same. So you can see it's very lush, very green. Now, this is where Tobias lives in the refugee camp. This is his place. And so we took a picture outside his hut. That's his hut standing behind us. That's where he and his wife sleep, and then he has 2 more huts where his kids are. Okay, so this is an orphanage that we went to on the refugee camp. And so, let me try to explain that the refugee camp is probably one of the toughest places I've ever gone to. First of all, preaching at that church was very challenging, very humbling, because they're people without a place. They have no place. And so, I really struggled with what do you say? What do you say to someone who has nothing and fits nowhere? And so that in itself was quite humbling and quite challenging. And then they took us to this orphanage. And so at the orphanage, there's 75 kids at this orphanage. They're not all in this picture. But every child there in this picture and not in this picture, every child, either both of their parents are dead or they cannot find their families. And so what happens is when they find a child under the age of 16, they bring them to an orphanage. And so because of the situation, these children are not adoptable because they have no papers. The only thing they know about these children is what the children can tell them about themselves. because of the chaos of fleeing South Sudan, or again, a mom and dad dies. The youngest child at the orphanage was 3 years old, and they aged out at 16. When they age out at 16, they're given a 10 by 10 plot, and they start their life in the refugee camp. So there's not any opportunity for these kids, what we would call opportunity for them. They try to teach them to read and write. Kurt asked, do you teach them a skill? And the guy responded, yes, we teach them to dig. And what that means is garden, so that they could know how to plant food and grow food when they got off the orphanage. So you go to the next slide. This is where they slept. This is either the boys or the girl. They had two, one for girls, one for boys. We did not go inside them, but I can tell you that their beds, they're all bunk beds made from tree limbs. So they're not made out of 2x4s. They're made from tree branches. And that right there is the kitchen, and that's an oven that you're looking at, and that's where they cook their food. Very efficient ovens, from what I've been told. They're made out of mud, and they cook on top of it. They're very hot. The heat in that room was pretty hot. But I went in there and took a picture of that. But that's where they prepare the food for the kids at the orphanage. You can go to the next one. Oh, Tanzania, good. So the orphanage was tough. Being on the refugee camp was challenging. It helped me understand a little bit better what our refugees that come through the International Welcome Center here, what some of them have gone through to get here. I met, some of the pastors that I taught in Uganda. I would ask them, how long have you been on the refugee camp? 20 years, 15 years. I mean, that is their life. That is where they live, and their lives really are reduced to three things: shelter, food, water. Every day they wake up and they make sure they have those three things, and that is what they do. On the refugee camp, you could, as we were driving around the refugee camp, I mean, there were just packs of teenage boys and girls with nothing to do. There's nothing to do, and so they just walk around the refugee camp because there's nothing to do. So it was this morning when I think about the refugee camp and I think about the orphanage. Part of me, if I think about it too long, I kind of get angry. I kind of want to get angry at God and say, "Okay, God, what you up to? This doesn't hardly seem right. This doesn't hardly seem like it should be." And I know that's not my place. Who am I to question God? But it was very, very humbling to see, and so when. As far as the International Welcome Center goes, when we engage with the people who are coming through the International Welcome Center here, I don't think we are cognizant of how much these people lost before they got here. And so it's an opportunity to befriend someone or to serve someone that has seen the worst and been through the worst of what a human can go through on this planet. So I know somebody was asking me when I came in, will I go back? If the opportunity presents itself, yes, absolutely. If the Lord opened the door, I would go back and continue to work with the pastors. The reason that it is significant to work with these pastors where they are is because many of these pastors are preaching to people who have never heard the gospel. So if you're familiar with something that they call the 1040 window, the 1040 window is one of the most the gospel has been spoken the least there of anywhere in the world is in this 1040 window. Well, South Sudan is in the 1040 window. And so these pastors are with people who never have heard the gospel. And so I can tell you that what they are planning and what they're hoping will happen is that a team would come back next year and go into South Sudan, go up to the city of Juba, and that there would be a training that happened there with the pastors of South Sudan. And what can happen is if that happens, we can also get pastors from Ethiopia, from Somalia, from Egypt, and from these places that are all in this 1040 window. And I just want you to know that in supporting that, Grace Bible Church is on the front line of sharing the gospel in places where it has never been shared before, by teaching pastors who are going back into these villages in these countries and sharing the gospel of Christ where they don't even have a Bible. And so it's just, I'm humbled that God allows me to be a part of that, because I know there are people that are way more talented, way more educated, way smarter than myself who could do that. But to think that he allows me to go is just very humbling, and I'm very appreciative to get to do it. I'm thankful I got a wife that supports me and lets me do it. But after that was over with, we drove back to Tanzania, and so that's where Cary was. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit.
Okay. So as Cary said, he got on I think he had a drive and then a plane flight to get into Tanzania, into Dar es Salaam. And so I was coming from the U.S. We timed it. God was really gracious. I was in the customs line as he was starting to coming around the corner to fill out his customs paperwork, and we saw each other. So that was really good to realize, okay, I'm there and he's already here. So that was good. From the airport, we had to wait for a ride for a little bit, but once we got a ride, we get on the streets of Tanzania, which is pure chaos. And I thought it was a welcome wagon for me. I don't think it was. I wish I had put a picture in here. I didn't. I guess there was a big soccer tournament, and people were lined the streets. It was like, just crowded with people, just yelling and screaming, and we were just driving through it like we were like bumper to bumper trying to get out. So anyway, we get through that, and then we went to the place where we stayed, and I don't know the name of it. I want to call it a Catholic compound, except it was a very nice place. It was a Catholic facility. We had our little nuns walking around and our little priest, but it was a very nice facility. What Cary stayed in and what I stayed in were drastically different. I always had a toilet, thank you, and some very nice Americanized things. But so the Tanzania project that I went to be a part of was being focused on marriage, which is a new thing that Ancient Promise has never done before. Ancient Promise has been in Africa for, I think, probably going on 8 or 9 years, and they've always taught these pastors. They've never touched on the subject of marriage, and so this was kind of the first time for them to kind of get their feet wet and try some things where the focus was more on marriage than on teaching the pastors. So there were 2 things that were planned. The first one at this Catholic facility was a kind of a retreat, is what they called it, and they brought in 9 couples. All of them were pastors and their wives to be a part of a 3-day retreat. And so we'll see some pictures. This is when we first got there. I was meeting one of the wives. She didn't speak a whole lot of English at all, so it was a very short smiling conversation with some hugs, and that's, but we had it. But her husband, I'm pretty sure this is David's wife, Gloria. Her husband was one of the translators, so he spoke great English. You found that most of the men, I would say 80 to 90% of the men spoke pretty good English, and only out of the 9 women, 3 of them spoke a little bit, some English. So if you'll go on to the next slide, sorry, I don't know what the order of these slides are. So this is like they're squirrels. I don't know what the heck, do you remember?
It's a mongoose.
It's a mongoose. I'm sorry, Edlin knew what this was.
Yeah.
These were everywhere.
They were everywhere, yeah.
In this little place, they scurried everywhere in little packs, and for some reason I threw a picture. I did not remember putting the picture. Okay, Cary put the picture in. Okay, so this is where we stayed. Is that the name of okay, that's the name of the place where we stayed. I didn't remember. You can go on to the next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit about this conference, or the retreat part of it. We had these 9 couples, and then Cary and I, and then Robbie and her husband John joined us, and then Kurt was there. Kurt's wife Becky was not able to make it. And so the format, Cary, some of you may have known, Cary and I did a study on Psalms 23 back in the winter. And so Cary actually took that material and kind of morphed it into a marriage retreat. Go Cary. It was actually, I was kind of like, really, how's this going to work? But it really did work out really, really well. So the marriage retreat, we set it up so that him and Kurt would alternate teachings. They did 1 verse for each teaching. And so we would do it all together. So here's them doing it all together. So all the couples were in there. And then after they would do the teaching for about an hour, then we would split up, and all the women would meet together and all the men would meet together. And we would have questions for them, which was interesting. I went there thinking, I've been married for 27 years or however long, but I have no idea what a marriage in Africa's look like. And I found out that it's very different, very, very culturally, extremely different. And as each day went on, I found out just how different it was. So I was kind of quiet. Like, I just wanted to hear things. I didn't feel like I had a whole lot to give. I wanted to kind of understand their culture more. But they opened up as the time went on. This is one of the couples there, John and Mary, probably one of the oldest couples there. The pastors that came to the retreat had all been through some of the ancient promise teachings before. They're all part of the Tanzania Assembly of God denomination in Tanzania. And these pastors, when you talk about going against the culture of the challenges in their marriages, I think they've already, they're going against the culture. And the culture's really tough. I mean, women, they're not valued much. Now, they're by their side, don't get me wrong, they're right there, but they're like things like when a husband dies, culturally, all of his belongings either go to his brothers or his sons. The wives are not taken care of, and unless one of the sons or the brothers chooses to help take care of the widow, they're without nothing. There's just some really odd things that we can't relate to. The culture teaches, and even women tell other women that when they first get married that your husband doesn't love you if he doesn't beat you. What? So just some really odd cultural things that just, and so some of that came out but I would say the men at the retreat, they treated their wives well, but they were willing to learn to treat them even better. And the wives had to learn that, you have to be who God called you to be, and what does that look like in marriage? And so it was really interesting to be a part of it. Oh, this is one of the other couples. I think I tried to write the names down, because Daniel and Melina. This was the quietest couple. Neither of them spoke English. I probably had the least conversation with them just because of the translation. So this is that first lady I was talking to. This is David and Gloria. They were not able to be there the whole time. David was very expressive, really neat, funny guy. Gloria was kind of quiet. They had young kids, but they had to leave a little bit early because of a wedding. So this is Emmanuel and Tumaini. So Emmanuel was one of the other translators, one of the funniest Tanzanian men I've ever met in my life, just has a funny sense of humor. I can't explain it exactly, but his wife is Tumaini. I got to know her pretty well. She does speak English decently. She got to hear her story a little bit. I was asking her how she met Emmanuel, and so she went away to formal school, which I believe is high school. Not real sure. Is formal school high school? Okay. So she had gone away to formal school, and Emmanuel became the pastor where her family went. Come to find out, her family, her mom was her dad's second wife, and somewhere along there, her mom got saved, and her dad did not, and he went on to have third and fourth wife, and so they ultimately...
All at the same time.
Yeah, all at the same time. I'm not talking divorce, and I'm talking consistently.
3 or 4 wives
at the same time. So Tumaini, I think she had a really rough childhood. I don't think she had a very good relationship with her father, and anyway, she met Emmanuel. She's very shy, very reserved lady. One of the sweetest things, there was a point where we had asking the women to share. I can't remember exactly what the question was. It was trying to share something good about their marriage. I think it was kind of along the lines of the question we asked her, and she said, "Emmanuel has given me confidence." And it was really sweet. Emmanuel obviously pastors the church, but he also helps Ancient Promise, so he's gone a fair amount. Pastors don't make a whole lot of money there, and so she actually she runs a store and has some employees, and she has some of her own little businesses, and it was just neat to see the confidence and the courage that she has and she's just a really neat lady that I really enjoyed meeting. So this is Maria and Rogers, right? Mm-hmm. So Rogers was in the leadership of the Tanzania Assembly of God, and him and his wife came. The interesting story I'll tell you about them is Maria was one of our translators. She probably spoke the best English out of the women. She worked full-time at a government job and had a good job. They only had one daughter, and so I got to talking to her a little bit about that, and that was kind of interesting because most of the families are pretty large, and it's very important to have boys in Tanzania, as you can imagine, and they only had one daughter, and so there was a point that she shared in our group how she really got angry with God because she said, all my friends were having babies left and right and even having abortions to prevent from having more babies. And she said, God only gave me a girl. And her girl now lives in Canada. So she just talked about having to trust God through that, and in not having the multitude of kids, which is very important for them in their culture. Very, very sweet lady. Enjoyed meeting her and her husband. The flowers, and I wish in this place was absolutely gorgeous. This looks like velvet when you see it in place. I don't have any idea what it's called, but one day when we had a little bit of extra time, we would just walk around the little facility, and one day I just took picture after picture of flowers because they were just fabulous. Did I really put all these in here?
Yeah, I didn't put the flowers.
Okay. I don't remember putting all the flowers. Well, they were on your camera, though. So they...
Yeah, but
Anyway, here's a lot. That's a really interesting palm tree. This is, again, all in that facility that we stayed. I've just never seen a palm tree like that. That had really pokey things on it sticking out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm giving you the plant. Okay, we may be a little bit out of order, but this is the church. So after we did the retreat, we did a conference, which was just 2 days, and there was about 80 or 90 people, about 45 couples that were there. And so this is the church where that was held. Okay, so this is them starting the very beginning of this conference. And so they all come in, and it's really, the chairs were set up in threes, all the way back, threes. And so they're getting up, getting ready to sing, and only Robbie and I noticed it. Sounds like men wouldn't notice this, okay? But all of the couples had a chair between them. Man, chair, woman, man, chair, woman, the whole thing. And Robbie and I both noticed it, and we're like, seriously? Like, what is going on here? So Robbie, I love her, she just got up there and said, okay, guys, we're not going to do this. You know, it just doesn't show love if we're not sitting next to our spouses. So the next thing you know, sure enough, she made them all get next to their spouses. It was great. Just breaking it up. But this is Cary sharing with Emmanuel, translating there at the church. I don't know what, you can go on to the next one. Okay, so this is back and forth. This is the back at the retreat. This was the 9 couples as they were sitting listening. So Cary did the very same, the same information that he shared in the retreat that we did over 3 days. Is that right? He also did in 2 days with the conference, which was the larger group. The difference is with this group, again, we would break it up. Cary or Kurt would share for an hour. Then we would go spend an hour with the women. Cary and Kurt would spend an hour with the men. And then we would tell them to have couple time. So then they would take what they had learned and what they had talked about and then talk together as a couple. You can go into the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. In the bigger group, though, we did try to have some men group and some women time, some women time and some men time, but there was no couple time. It was just a lot quicker. Go back to that others. Can you go back, Neil? So that's Robbie and her husband, John. Robbie's the one who founded Ancient Promise, and it was neat for them to be there together. You know, Robbie amazes me in what she does and what God's called her to do and what she's willing to do. She, what does she have? She has MS, and she'll tell you that, you know, there was a point in her life she didn't think she'd walk. I mean, the doctor said there's a chance you may lose your ability to ambulate. And so she really goes by faith and just amazingly pushes forward. And John supports her. He is not there near. I mean, she's gone for months on end, and John is back building a house in Colorado or something. But it was neat to see them together and to support each other through this time in the marriage retreat. This is us meeting with the ladies. There was a little hut, and so that was our time. It would just be Robbie and me, and then the 9 ladies sharing. The lady in the white shawl closest, her name was Agnes, and she was one of the, interestingly enough, she was also a pastor. It took me a couple of days to realize that. She shared, was a really interesting story. In our talks one day, she shared that she lost her son to tetanus. So it's very common for them to send their kids to boarding school if they want them to have a good education. And so they had sent their son off to boarding school, and they got a call from the school that he was very, very sick, and they were taking him immediately to the hospital, and come to find out he had probably gotten some type of scratch, some type of cut, and it had developed into tetanus, and he died, you know, within a couple of days. And she said she was very angry, you know, with God, and she said there was a point that I didn't want to live, but she said God had brought her through that and actually brought her into a closer relationship with him, and her husband supported her becoming a pastor, and so she has, and then God gifted him with another son who was only about 5 years old. So I think they had a daughter also, and I think she's probably close to being out of high school, and they have a 5-year-old son. So it's just a neat story of her sharing of God's goodness in her life and the tough things that she's gone through. It's back in the classroom. So they stuck us up front and asked us questions. That's Kurt from California sharing with Emmanuel. So this was our safari, but they have another word for it, a game drive. A game drive. So I didn't know what to expect. There's these open Jeeps. They're like 3 different levels of seating. So Cary and I and Kurt were up in the back, and we headed off for our game drive. This is a huge, gigantic tree that was on the game drive that you can walk inside, and like they would hang meat. Like, is that right?
So the poachers would come and poach, and to hide the carcass, they had a pulley set up in this tree, and they would pull the carcass up in that tree so that they wouldn't get caught. But then they found the tree, and so they lost their place to hide their carcasses. Yep.
So the food was good. This was somebody else's plate, not mine. I wouldn't have picked this. It was a whole fish. The plate closest to the people is a whole fish just fried. And then this white stuff, I'll let Cary. It's kind of pasty.
It's ungali, a maize base. It has no taste, but it's a filler that they use. They dip it in everything and eat it.
They just pinch it off, and
Yeah,
they do a lot of finger eating. When you walk into a restaurant, or if a facility has prepared you a meal, there's a water source and soap, right? At least a water source, but a water source usually and some soap. So you wash your hands. Even the restaurants had sinks on the walls of the restaurant, so you could just go wash your hands. Kind of just different. So this is Johanna. I don't know if you can tell his outfit. This is not very good. It looks like pajamas he has on. Their dress is just amazing. And so this was like blue pajamas. And anyway, John, Robbie's husband was like, "Hey, Johanna, you wore your pajamas today, I see." So he was a really funny guy.
Yeah.
Giraffes.
Yeah.
Giraffes. We got pretty close to there. Okay, so that was the coolest. There was a lioness, like from here to the front row. We were in our Jeep. You can see the Jeep. We're not in that Jeep, obviously, because I was taking the picture, but that's kind of what we were, and that close to a lioness. We did see an elephant, but it was in really tall grass, and you could just barely see it. And then we saw a couple of lionesses and lots and lots of zebras.
Llamas. Impalas.
Impalas, which look like deer. So this is a lady carrying something on her head that just amazes me. That's very common over there. The women they work really hard. I was talking to Tumaini, because one of the things that Cary and Kurt tried to encourage the couples to spend time together, just the two of them, which seems foreign to them. And I said to Tumaini, I said, if you were to go out to eat, could you and Emmanuel go out to eat on a regular basis? And she said, no. She said the community would talk bad about me, saying I was a lazy wife if I did that, because I'm expected to feed my family, and if I'm out eating in public in my community, they'll talk bad about me. It was just interesting. So this was the pastor. No, he was like a...
No, he's a pastor. He's a pastor of a really larger church in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. And he helped put the marriage conference together there in Dar es Salaam for the Tanzania Assembly of God. He's the one that invited all the pastors. So they invited like 200 couples, and 45 of them came. And they never had a marriage conference. They didn't know what that was. So they were real pleased with the turnout.
And that's him in his office. So this is them finally standing next to each other. So I just show the difference. There wasn't a chair. Now they were close. See, sitting by each other. It's good. Oh, the traffic and the roads. It's lots of bumps.
A lot of bumps.
They called it the African massage.
Riding in a car, doing this. You felt it the next day.
It was actually good to be smushed between two people because you just bounced off each other. This is the last night we were there. We went to eat at a restaurant in a very Americanized mall. And the guy in the middle, his name was Ezekiel. He was also one of the translators. He was at both the retreat and the conference, but his wife wasn't able to make it. Interestingly enough, I was asking him how his wife was, a little bit about his wife, and she had just had a miscarriage a couple of days before this, and he was off, translating and doing his thing. He was a very, very intelligent man, very good man.
Yeah. So that's all the pictures. Realize that it's, it's hard. Hopefully it helps you, gives you an understanding of kind of what it was like, and some of the experiences that we had there. The people are amazing people, and that's who we spend most of our time with. Our trips, we did do the one day that we went on safari, but the other 15 days I was there not traveling, we were pretty much in one spot working with one group of people, and so you really get to know the people, which is great because they're amazing people, very dedicated to the Lord. We had one of our pastors that was at the training in Uganda. While he was there, his wife gave birth to his son, and I was like, "Why aren't you with your wife?" He's like, "Oh no, I need to be here learning God's word." And we would almost shun somebody for that. We would say, "You're crazy," but for him, that was priority. And so it's kind of hard. That's they just see it very different than we see it. They're very hungry to know the Word of God and to understand it, to the place that they're willing to make sacrifices that if we had someone on staff here whose wife was pregnant and that person refused to take some days off, we would get on to them. We would. That's how different it is between there and here.
I was just going to say, on the safari or the game drive, we took the 9 couples. That was actually a treat for them too, Ancient Promise, and not a one of them had ever been, which blew my mind. It's like us, I don't know, it's like a Disney World experience for us, but they had never participated in that. So it was cool just to even see them get very excited about doing that.
So I don't know, maybe you have some questions you want to ask about this. We'll try to answer them the best that we can. Yes, Doug?
Gary, would you just give an overview of one day of teaching? How do you go about what you're trying to help them do?
Yeah.
Help them prepare to.
Yeah. Okay. So it's called Timothy Project. That's what this particular training is called. It's called the Timothy Project. In the morning, it's a Bible study. That's what Kurt led this Bible study, and it's called Transformed by Truth. And so it's different passages that they look at. They have homework that we give them that they work through these different passages, and then each morning he would go back through these Transformed by Truth passages with them. Then they would have a break. Typically, they would have tea around 10:30 or 11. That's where we would break. We would go do tea, and we would probably let them go into small groups after that. Then is lunch. Then when we came back from lunch, it would be about 1 o'clock. And so from 1 to 5 is when I would teach my part, which is discovering God together. And so that's the inductive Bible study. I teach them how to do an inductive Bible study. And we have charts for them to use. So as they answer the questions, we teach them to look at one passage at a time. And as they answer the questions, they put the answers in this chart. And then I show them how they can take that chart, the answers on the chart, and use it to make an outline for a message. And so it takes several days to go through that process, because most of their learning, most of their education is memory. You're taught a fact, now just remember the fact. Remember that, remember that, remember that. And inductive Bible study is not that. You're taught to critically think. What is this passage saying? And so that's a very different way of learning for them. So it takes 10 days to get them through the inductive Bible study. So that's how. So our day would start at 9 o'clock, and we would be done about 5 o'clock. Yes, 3 went up at the same time. I saw Janice first, then Mike, then Jim.
Geographically, I see where you are close to the Congo, sort of. The Congolese we work with here, I'm just curious how their refugee camp would be, if you know.
I don't know. I can tell you this because I wanted to read where I was going, so I did some study on the refugee camps, particularly in Uganda and in this Pajarina area. And believe it or not, what I read was that if you're going to be a refugee, the place to be one is in Uganda, because they are treated the best in Uganda as in any other country in Africa, because Uganda is the only country that gives refugees land. It is their land. It's not much land, but it is their land to use. And typically it is not that way anywhere else. So I don't know where there were some Congolese people in the refugee camps, but most of them came from South Sudan.
The one gentleman that you said was a pastor there, and he had a family there in the refugee camp, and then he went into South Sudan to his church.
Yeah.
And then you showed a picture of over that mountain in South Sudan. So how did he get back and forth?
He drives. Yeah. So there's an individual, and I do not know this individual. This individual gifted Tobias with a very nice truck. It's a Toyota 4-wheel drive kind of a Land Rover vehicle. And if it were not for that, he could not get around and do what he's doing. But that's how he does it. Yeah, I mean, gas is expensive there as it is here, but the Lord provides for him to get around and do what he does. Yeah. Jim.
Scriptures they used, were they translated into their language, or were you using?
Yeah, so great question. So the Mali language only has the New Testament. And so they had Mali and English New Testaments. So they can speak English and read English, but it is their second language, not their first one. Yeah. That's a good question. Any other questions?
So they don't have any Old Testament?
Not in print. They can read the English Old Testament, but not in their own language, not in Mali.
It's easier to translate the New Testament than it is the Old, and that's where Wycliffe and those
Yeah,
concentrate their time, and then they can move on to the Old Testament.
yeah.
It takes years longer for that.
Now, I
Yeah.
think when we were in Tanzania, they used the Swahili Bible,
Mm-hmm.
which I think has both New
Both,
and Old
yeah.
Testament.
Yeah. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, I noticed some of the structures, like the church you was in, that the roof was just like, been like, they're not 2x4s like you said, and then, they're just the grass huts and stuff like that, but it's so fertile out there, so they must get a lot of rain. Is there a lot of danger? I mean, we get heavy winds here, do you think that those weren't sustained very well? And
Yeah.
like 40, 50 mile an hour winds maybe or something like that, but.
Well, one of the huts that we met under actually fell one night during a rainstorm. And so nobody was under it, but the next morning the group that met there had to go meet somewhere else because it did. Yeah, yeah. And so they just take the old post out, put a new post in, put it right back up. Yeah. Any other questions? Cary?
All political refugees, and what's the difference between immigrating from country to country, or are they escaping Sudan
Yeah.
and then they're taken care of from the home country?
So that's a great question. So everyone in a refugee camp had to flee their country. I didn't meet a single person who wanted to be in the refugee camp. They wanted to be at home, and home was South Sudan. South Sudan, it's just I don't understand all the politics behind it, but there's a Muslim led political group, and there's a Christian-led political group, and the Christian group the word Christian doesn't mean the same thing that does to you and I here, but they oppose each other, and right now the Muslims hold most of the military, most of the government, and so if they want something, they just come and take it, and so it's either fight them and potentially die, because the government has guns. The government has the guns, not the people, and so they have to flee. They just have to flee to live, to protect their families, to stay alive, because the government takes their land, takes their property, and so they have no place to go. So they go to the refugee camp, and so it's civil war. It's a type of civil war that they're going through, and they can go back, but there's nothing to go back to, or they can go back and potentially be attacked if they try to regain what was taken from them. It's very hard for us to understand. The day that we met with the UN officials to get permission to go on the refugee camp, the man that we met with, he told us right up front, he said, I'm a believer, I love the Lord, and he said, I'm here trying to get these people home. He said, I've been doing it for over a decade. I'm trying to get it so that they can go back home. We need peace in this region of the world. So the goal, even the goal of the UN, is for these people to go back home. But again, it's too dangerous for them to go home.